I'm not a big fan of giving trigger warnings, but this time you're going to get one. What follows is a huge rant. I'm going to be going off possibly some profanity, maybe even some rubber dog poop. If that's not something you're interested in, I'd say skip this video. What's up, Internet? Jay here from Nerd Rage Against the Machine, and yeah, I got some things to say. I'm a little pissed off today, and I think rightfully so. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about politics. Now, as of this recording, Russians are invading Ukraine. Huge problem, in my opinion. And right now, it does feel like it's kind of everyone's kind of deciding where they are. I, for one, support Ukraine. As does CD Projekt Red, the makers of Cyberpunk 2077. So, Cyberpunk 2077 got a second round of review bombs over this. Now, the first time, I get it. The game had some flaws. Sure, give it negative reviews. Although, I've always thought that the idea of review bombing is absolute cowardice. If you don't have the nuts to just play the or absorb the media product and then review it fairly, then don't review. If your entire purpose is just to say, I don't like the principle, so I'm going to make a review that says, I think this sucks, the door's that way. Don't review it. A review is more than just saying, I don't like it, especially if you've had no experience with it. But of the many review bombs I saw, some of them I'm sure were Russian sympathizers or Russian bots. Some of them said things like, what the H, CD Projekt Red, you're Poland. Poland is effectively part of Russia. But some of them said the thing that really blew my mind, which is, don't bring politics into Cyberpunk. Look, I have been playing in the Cyberpunk universe since Cyberpunk 2013, the first edition that Mike Pondsmith put out as a pen and paper RPG. I have run tons of Cyberpunk 2020. I have Cyberpunk Red on my shelf. I've run it a couple times. I pre-ordered this sight unseen. I've kept it. I did not throw a tantrum when it did glitch to high heaven and low hell. I waited for patches patiently. And again, I'm not saying it's a perfect game, but I'm just going to say this. Of any game I've played, I mean, Cyberpunk as a world is politics. It is, I mean, the entire purpose of the game is based in a world in which governments have been eroded by corporate interests, and your job, your goal in the game is to rebel against the corporate interests. The game is a game about rebellion, and thus about politics. So if you think, keep your politics out of my Cyberpunk, don't play Cyberpunk. And that brings me to my next point, which is, anytime I have heard anyone say the phrase, don't insert your politics into my insert media product here, you, sir, are an effing moron. Yes, moron. How do I know this? There is not such a thing as a piece of media production that doesn't at least have some political bent. Don't believe me? Let's go through some big ones, and these are ones I've always heard, such as, keep your politics out of my Star Wars. Okay, I get it. Star Wars is a science fantasy series set in a galaxy far, far away with magical powers. But you know what George Lucas said he based the rebellion on? The Viet Cong. Now, for those of you who don't know, George Lucas was set to direct Apocalypse Now, back when he and Francis Ford Coppola were part of the group that formed American Zoetrope. The original slate would have called for him to direct Apocalypse Now, a big Vietnam film, very dark, very political. Instead, Coppola did it, and he did this little thing called Star Wars. But he was inspired by the era, and yes, the rebellion is based upon the Viet Cong. They are literally waging a guerrilla war with less powerful tactics and less technology. The Empire, and even in the first 3 films, everyone knows that the Empire is a bunch of British white guys in snappy gray uniforms that look like they were designed by Hugo Boss. In case you didn't know, Hugo Boss was the designer of the Nazi uniform. So, symbolism? Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism there, and a lot of politics that you may not realize. Now, it may not be as obvious, and this is, I think, where I get really mad with this kind of keep your politics out of my Star Wars logic is, it comes more when you put more diverse casts in it. It's like, that's not politics, that's just diversity. There's a huge difference between the two. And so if your complaint is they've added more people of color, added more female voices, go to hell. It's still a good show. It's still a good film series. If you have legitimate complaints about any of the Star Wars movies, that's fine. But if your complaint is simply they made a black stormtrooper or they made it political when it didn't have to be, well, there's the door. Let's move on to the next one. Keep your politics out of my Star Trek. Oh boy, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but again, Star Trek is rife with politics. Many episodes of Star Trek are based upon situations that were pulled from current events. A Private Little War was literally a Vietnam War in an episode to give you kind of a thought about the Vietnam War. Let This Be Our Last Battleground was all about racism. I am superior to him because I'm white on the right side. He's white on the left side. And Roddenberry did this with aliens and green people and little purple people because he figured this was a way to kind of circumvent, here's my political views, here's my argument for what we need to do in this culture, but I'll present it with little green men because that way maybe you'll just see it as fantasy and it'll just seep in and not be as overt as clubbing you over the head with it. I remember when Discovery first came out and somebody threw a fit about the fact they were forcing diversity into Star Trek, and it's like, where have you been? Star Trek has always been a diverse cast. It has had more people of color, more female voices than most shows of that type. And honestly, it's better for it. It's one of the reasons I'm a huge Star Trek fan. It shows an evolved humanity, and yes, politically so, it's an evolved humanity, but it's still very political. Let's move on to keep your politics out of my comic books. Okay, guys. The first issue of Captain America. He's punching somebody of note on the cover. Is it Thanos? No, it can't be Thanos. Thanos wouldn't come around till at least the Silver Age. Was it Mephisto? No. Dr. Octopus? No, again, Silver Age. Anyone from Hydra? No, it was Adolf Hitler. That book was political. He was literally punching Hitler at a time when Hitler was a prominent member of global politics. Like him or hate him, that's the case. And this isn't the only example of this. World's Finest for DC had Superman and Batman fighting the Axis powers. Look magazine, a popular periodical in the 30s and 40s, commissioned a story of Superman kidnapping Stalin and Hitler and bringing them both in front of the League of Nations World Court. In fact, look that one up and look up the Nazi response. It's full of some very, very choice words, which I'm not being monetized yet, I'd like to not, make this video that controversial. But damn. And that's not the only examples of this. The comic book Green Lantern and Green Arrow was literally a point-counterpoint. Ollie Queen, the Green Arrow, is a super liberal character. He is a veritable hippie, and I'm not saying that to attack the man. Meanwhile, Green Lantern, who is a character I really enjoy, is very conservative. He is a Republican. He is a Reagan Republican. I would not have doubted he voted for Reagan. And a lot of those stories deal with the fact that these two are friends and on political opposites of the spectrum. So again, if you're going to complain that things like having a female Captain Marvel or Miles Morales is enforced diversity, and this is the reason you need to keep politics out of my comic books. Go back and read some comic books, for God's sake. Do yourself a favor and actually read the books and not just, watch a couple of movies and think you're now an expert in the subject, because, sorry, Chief, that's just not the case. And of course, it's not just comic books, Star Trek, Star Wars. There are other examples of this. Disney did anti-World War II propaganda and additional propaganda beyond that. The Warner Brothers did a series of cartoons called Snafu, Situation Normal, all fouled up, which were meant as training films for American GIs during the Second World War. And there have been political and pop culture references all throughout Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, and all of those cartoons. And let's hit literature while we're at the subject, and not to make it specifically liberal politics, but conservative politics. Robert Heinlein's book Starship Troopers is a very conservative science fiction story. The idea of the veterans being the driving force between the government and that personal responsibility angle, service guarantees citizenship, that's all in the book. In fact, in the book, unlike the movie, there is no real romance between Johnny Rico and the character of Carmen Ibanez. I mean, yeah, he thinks she's attractive, but it's not the driving force. It's not what brings him into the military. It's actually more Carl just saying, hey, the military's cool. Okay. The book is a very different thing. In fact, there's a perfect example. The book is very conservative. The book is very Republicanist, very, very conservative, whereas the Paul Verhoeven film is very liberal, and in a lot of ways is a deconstruction and a parody of what we see in the book. Very different products and with very different agendas. Again, politics in media. There's not a way around it, guys. It's going to happen. There are politics in media, and no story, no work of art is completely immune. You name it. H.P. Lovecraft, Call of Cthulhu, deals with a lot of his own xenophobic and racist issues. The Lord of the Rings has themes that are, again, politically based. One could see it as us against them in a lot of respects. And, the gauntlet goes on. I mean, unless you're talking about something that is so, so boiled down to nothing, like, say, Teletubbies, you're really talking about, any art with weight is going to have politics. And quite frankly, every time I hear the get your politics out of my insert media or insert entertainment, all I can say is, grow the hell up, man. And I do apologize if this seems like it's long, if it seems like I'm preachy, and I'm just getting angry about this, but this is something that has bothered me for the longest time. And it's often the people who say it are also the people who when it's their politics, seem to turn a blind eye, which also ticks me off. Because again, it's politics on both sides, and you're going to have that in any media. I mean, that's what art is all about, is expressing your beliefs and your opinions. There's no artist that doesn't have an agenda, whether it's Tolkien, Ayn Rand, Diane Steele, or J.K. Rowling, or many other artists and authors. Their opinions, their stories, stories are based upon their beliefs and their opinions and their politics. So, with that, I'm just going to let this go. Bid you adieu. Have a good night, folks.